Can anyone beat the Georgia Bulldogs? I think the question that we asked coming into the season was that same question. And the obvious answer was no. Everyone just expected them to dominate and run through everyone. And what we saw early on was that wasn't the case. This was a Georgia team that needed to figure out its identity. It needed to figure out the stars that would take control. And it needed to figure out, again, how do we move on with losing so much NFL talent? The last couple of years, it's just been, well, we have this NFL guy that can move forward and this the NFL guy that can be a stud for us. And they just don't have that same mentality this year. They don't have that same talent level. They had to find a different identity. And now we've figured out that I feel like they've discovered that. And that's the reason why it's going to be tough to beat them. Because when you look at the beginning of the year, there were games that Auburn, where you could have seen Georgia lost. And you can see them lose games and you could see where they would fall. There were definitely games where Georgia was not dominant. They were far from it, and they were on the verge of losing a game. We knew that that would happen, especially early in the season. We thought that maybe the Kentucky game was their statement game, and I think that was a part of it. But this was a huge win for Georgia in many ways. Beating Florida as a rival is obviously huge, but now you're looking at you went through the beginning of the year where you're trying to figure things out, you're going through a transition, there are certain bumps in the road that you're trying to get through. And this year's team, I think the bumps affect them a little bit more than what we saw in previous teams. So now that you've navigated that, well, the first you get through that, you figure out, okay, this is what happens in this situation, and this is what happens in that situation. Here's certain bumps that we have to figure out. Here are certain situations that we are vulnerable in. Now they have figured out how to manage those situations. And now their schedule, like I said, does not bode well for an upset. But when you're looking at this team as a whole, the biggest thing was the confidence, and the biggest thing was going to be how are you able to navigate when things aren't going your way? Because for Georgia, it's been a long time since things haven't really gone their way, where they've had a stretch of games where they've had to figure things out and work together to overcome some adversity. And it, like I said, it's been a while, and sometimes that's hard, especially when you're not used to it. The last 2 years, Georgia has been absolutely dominant, and I'm not necessarily saying that they're out of the woods yet, but I think it's going to be very difficult, despite the stretch coming up, to beat Georgia. Georgia has figured a lot of things out. Carson Beck appears to be a million times more confident than he was at the beginning of the year. And that's something that really helps, especially with Brock Bowers out. You saw a kid today that was wheeling and dealing. He hit Lad McConkey in stride. He hit Oscar Delp with some nice plays. I think the biggest thing is that this team does not rely on one player. They do not rely on a certain guy to bail them out. They play well as a whole, and finding ways to work together as a team and as a unit is what's going to help them in the next 3 games. Because when you look at, there's 4 games left. The next game is against Missouri. Missouri is one of the hottest teams in college football, and they're playing it at a really high level. Whether or not they can beat Georgia remains to be seen, but we'll see. Then the next game is Ole Miss, a team that is in contention for an SEC championship. They obviously need a little bit of luck, but definitely a team to keep an eye out. And then you have to play Tennessee. Tennessee, maybe not the threat that we once thought they were coming into the year, but that's definitely a team. If you're Georgia at the beginning of the year and you have this 3 game stretch, there are concerns about 1 or 2 losses being in that stretch. Maybe not necessarily to Missouri, but Ole Miss and Tennessee, I think a lot of people would have expected to be challenges for Georgia. Now that they are playing, I think it really at a level that we expected them to, especially the offense. Maybe the defense not necessarily is playing as well as we want, but the offense is really a difference. And Florida had no answer for what Georgia wanted to do, mostly because they didn't have one guy to key on. The rushing attack looked pretty efficient at times. The passing attack was very diverse, and there are a bunch of people contributing. That's kind of hard to slow down when you can't just lock in on one player and say, if we take this away, we'll be successful because everybody's contributing, everybody is making plays. And that's what alarms me if you're Missouri, Ole Miss, and Tennessee, and even Georgia Tech at the end of the year. But that's a little bit less of a challenge. When you're looking at how do you beat Georgia, it's at the beginning of the year when they don't have a ton of confidence, when they don't have a ton of chemistry. Now they're getting that chemistry, they're figuring things out. You can see on the field Carson Beck figuring some things out. You can see the light bulb go off. You can see certain things pop into his head where he is seeing things a lot better. He's playing with a ton of confidence. He's making smarter decisions. And now you have to figure out, okay, well, now that we don't have the lack of confidence as a factor on our side, what do we do to upset one of the best teams in college football? And the dynasty continues. It may not be as good as it was in the last 2 years, but good luck beating a team that just scored 51, 37, and 43 in their last 3 games. That's going to be tough. And this defense appears to be taking a step forward too. Now, Florida scored 20 points, but it wasn't particularly close. And Georgia appeared to have some big plays where it looks like they're playing better on defense as a whole. So it's going to be tough for any of these teams to pull off the upset. Georgia's playing with a ton of confidence, and that doesn't bode well if you're anybody trying to face them or trying to pull off an upset. But if you're going to do that, you have to play your best game and then just hope that maybe you can shatter some of that confidence and find a way to win the turnover battle, create some turnover luck, and then hope that in the end, Georgia is still as vulnerable as people may think they are. But right now, it feels like anyone beating Georgia is going to require a Herculean type effort. And I don't know if there's anybody in that schedule, at least until we get to the postseason, that can do anything about that.